Thank you, Carol. Have you heard of the butterfly effect? Not the movie, not the really bad movie with Ashton Kutcher, but the butterfly effect. If a butterfly flaps its wings one side of the world, there's a tornado on the other side of the world. And the whole point is to say that everything in the world is connected in some way, shape or form to each other. Here's an example. There's a theory that the Fukushima nuclear leak in 2011 influenced the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Have you heard this theory? It's not some, unusual theory. I was listening to the ABC, so it was definitely from a good source. So here's the theory. So 2011, there was an earthquake and it caused a tsunami, and the tsunami hit the east coast of Japan, and the Fukushima nuclear power plant was affected. There was a breakdown. The generators broke down. They couldn't cool the reactor. There was a radiation leak, and the effects of that are still felt today in that region. So that was obviously a very bad disaster. And so in Europe, Germany, who just happens to be the largest electricity user in Europe, said, you know what, these nuclear power plants, they seem a bit dangerous. We're going to close them all down. And so what we're going to do when we close our nuclear power stations for generating electricity, we're going to use gas. And we're going to use gas to run the turbines, and that's going to produce the electricity. And where are we going to get gas from? I know, let's get a big pipe that comes from Russia, and we'll get another one that comes from Ukraine, and that's how we'll get the gas to run the turbines to create electricity. And all's good. But then what happened if someone in Russia or Ukraine, and you can work out who, said, if I controlled all of Russia and all of Ukraine, then I'd control all of the gas in the area, and I'd have all the control, and I'd get all the profit. And the theory is, and Putin, if you listen to this, don't come out and murder my family and me. The theory is that Putin invaded Ukraine because one of the reasons was he wanted to control all the gas pipelines that go to that way. So the butterfly effect is that 2011, an earthquake off the coast of Japan affected the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Because, and unfortunately that's still going, that conflict. That's cut the butterfly effect, that something that happens in one part of the world will affect the other part of the world, and because we're all in some way connected. So in another way, in a similar way, but with a more positive outcome, we are here today as the people of God in Jesus Christ because there was a famine in a place called Canaan sometime in the second millennium before Christ. So sometime in the 2000 or so years before Christ was born, there was a famine in Canaan, and that's why we're here today. Believe me? Roll credits, let's go home. No, let me explain. I'm going to read large slabs from Exodus today, from chapters 1 to 4. We won't read the whole 1 to 4 chapters of Exodus, but there'll be pieces of it. So if you do have a Bible handy or a device, it will help, because I'm not going to put them all on the screen because there's too many. But we're going to follow on from what Carol read earlier. So if you've read the last 12 chapters or so of the book of Genesis, and if you haven't, I recommend you do, you'll know the story of Joseph. Joseph, whose brothers sold him into slavery from Canaan to Egypt, and he was the one who rescued Egypt from a terrible famine. Joseph became basically the prime minister of Egypt. He was the second in charge to the Pharaoh. And he did that because he interpreted Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh had a dream that there were 7 fat cows, and they were eaten by 7 skinny cows. And Joseph said, well, this is what the dream means. There's going to be 7 years of great harvests, and then there's going to be 7 years of terrible famine. And the famine will be so bad, it will seem like the good years were nothing. And so Joseph encouraged them to build storehouses to store the grain in the good years, so they'd have grain to get them through the hard years. And that happened. That came to pass. And Egypt was a prosperous and fertile country, and it remained a country that had enough supplies during the famine because of Joseph's actions. And so there was this man called Jacob in Canaan. He was of the family line of Abraham and Isaac. And he travelled to Egypt because there was a famine. It just so happened that his son was the prime minister. That was pretty helpful. So what? What can we learn from this event where there was a famine and a family moved to Egypt where there was grain? These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family. This is Exodus 1:1. Reuben, Simeon, Levi and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. And Carol, you did a great job of reading all those names. You obviously did your homework. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. But for some reason, after the famine was over, Jacob and his sons didn't go back to Canaan. They didn't go back home. They stayed in Egypt. And we don't really know why. Like, it doesn't specifically say in the Bible that God asked them to go back to the land of Canaan, which he was promising them as their inheritance. It doesn't say why they stayed in Egypt. I'm going to guess that it was pretty easy to live in Egypt. It was a prosperous place. It was a wealthy place. It was a very fertile place. Also a very immoral place. Egypt is the byword for immorality in the Old Testament. But it was easy. They were willing to let that part of it slide because it was so easy to live in Egypt. And so they settled down. They built houses. They watched sport on a Friday night. They got dad bods because life was good. Life was easy for a while. Exodus 1:6-10. Oh, I've got a slide there. Max, can you roll it just the next one? You might have to point it to there. Yeah. Press the red button. Yeah. It's important to remain calm and not panic in these times, or give it to your big sister. Is it turned on? Is the green bit showing? Yeah. I find sometimes if you hold up to your head, it works. But I can't be responsible for the radiation that comes out of it. One more time, and then... Oh, there you go. Well done. This is a famous painting. This is the meeting of Joseph and Jacob in Egypt by William Brassey Hall in around about 1900. He actually went to what was called Palestine to see what the surroundings were, because before that, all the pictures, the paintings that depicted biblical life all looked like Europe, because they didn't know any different. So anyway, this is obviously Joseph and Jacob meeting in Egypt. Hadn't seen his dad for a while. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that land was filled with them. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, these Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So Pharaoh's looking at his country, and he thinks there's Israelites everywhere. And they're not like us. They're in our country. He likes having them there because they contribute to the prosperity of the nation. Because God is blessing them in that place, because God blesses them wherever they go. But he doesn't like the fact that they're getting so numerous he sees them as a threat. What if they take over the country? What if they leave the country and we don't have their services? What if they leave the country and come back with an army and take us over? This is a terrible example of overreaction and racism, really. Two things that cause racism, two of the main things that cause racism. Seeing someone who is not like you as somehow other than you. And secondly, is reacting to that in prejudice and fear and ignorance. If you get to know somebody who is different to you, they'll become your friend. But if you maintain a distance between you and them, you will have ignorance and fear, and that's one of the factors that leads to racism. You probably know that story about during the First World War, at the end of 1914, there was a thing called the Christmas truce, where on Christmas Day the two opposing forces got out of their trenches and apparently played a soccer game. I don't think it's been verified because no one can agree who won. But these just ordinary people who were on opposing sides sent by the government to fight a war came out of the trenches and met each other, and they became friends. And they said after that they didn't want to shoot at each other because they humanised the enemy, and they had to actually move those troops to other places so that they wouldn't see each other. If you know your enemy becomes your friend. Exodus 1:11-14. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labour, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. Do we have a picture of that? On the left is a mural that was found in a tomb in Egypt, and it shows what they call Levantine Asiatics, otherwise known as people from the Middle East to you and me, and they're building bricks. And down the bottom there is one of the storehouses that they believe that they built. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labour in brick and mortar, with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labour, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. They're starting to panic now, the Egyptians. But still they prosper because God is with them. I guess that's the first thing to take away from today for us as Christians, is that God looks after his people. If you live by biblical principles, you will prosper in life. For the most part. Sometimes the enemies of God rise up against us because of three things. Because of our own poor decisions. Maybe they were supposed to go back to Canaan. Maybe they weren't supposed to stay in Egypt. So poor decisions because of our fellow human beings or the world around us. So that's obviously the Egyptians. Or thirdly, attacks, spiritual attacks from the evil one. So the Israelites cranked up their oppression, and they're trying to wipe the Israelites out, which I'll get to on the other side of this page. We've got some more pictures there. Here's Nina Folk finds Moses in a basket. Who's Nina Folk? She was the actress in the Ten Commandments. That's a slide from the Ten Commandments. You know the story. This is Exodus, the later part of Exodus 1 and start of Exodus 2. You know that Pharaoh asked the midwives that delivered the Israelite babies to kill them. And of course they didn't do that because they feared God. So the next thing Pharaoh says, we'll take all the Israelite male babies and throw them in the river. And so Moses' mum obeyed that order. She put Moses in the river. He just happened to be in a basket, otherwise known as an ark. So there's a symbol of salvation. And we know the story. Pharaoh's daughter is bathing in the Nile, sees the basket, raises Moses as her own child. He becomes a prince of Egypt. And he would have been on track to become the next prime minister or the next Pharaoh even of Egypt, to be raised as a prince in the king's house. And on the other side is a painting by James Tissot, Moses Kills the Egyptian. And in a weird thing I found on the internet, you can get a coffee mug with that impression on it, or tea towels. Who wants to wake up to that every morning? Goodness gracious me, I'd go back to bed. Moses knows he's a Hebrew. He sees an Egyptian a slave master mistreating a Hebrew. He kills the Egyptian, buries his body in the sand. The next day, he sees two Israelites fighting, and he tells them to stop, and they say, "Who made you master over us? Are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian?" And he hides, and he flees, and he goes to Midian and meets a priest called Jethro and marries his daughter Zipporah. Why does Pharaoh want to kill Moses? I mean, Pharaoh is basically Moses' grandpa. Why does he want to kill him? I mean, life is pretty cheap in Egypt. What's one slave driver going to matter? You think you just let it pass? I'm not suggesting you do this in your family, but Pharaoh must have had something against Moses. Is there anything I can think of? Why would he hold him accountable for murder in a place where life is so cheap? I'm guessing he didn't want an Israelite to be the next prime minister or the next Pharaoh, and he was against Moses. So Moses goes to Midian, marries Zipporah, and he settles down, and he has a family, and he watches sport on the weekends, and he gets a dad bod. He has no known intention that we're aware of to go back to Egypt, even though he knows his people are being treated harshly there. He's happy just to live out his days in the middle of the desert. But then we get to Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 to 25. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Do you think God hadn't been concerned about them for the last 400 years? Do you think God forgot about them? I don't think so. But you've got to wonder, why did he let them suffer under slavery for so long? And you could say, well, God's ways are higher than our ways, and we don't understand what God's will is. But God always acts justly. God doesn't allow people to suffer unnecessarily. And I think the key is that the Israelites actually cried for help. So I'm assuming that they hadn't been crying for help to God previously. They'd been internalizing all their grief. They'd maybe been blaming themselves or blaming the Egyptians, but they hadn't cried out to God. And you think, goodness, they're being persecuted in this way. They've been treated this way. They've got God as their the one who's concerned of them. But I think they just didn't think to ask for help. Now, apparently, us blokes are like that as well. We don't ask for help. I'd rather go into a store and go up every aisle and look for the thing that's there. And then if I can't find it, I'll Google it, because you can go onto, like, say, the Woolies website and you type in Indian curry paste after about half an hour of looking, and it's like supposed to be on this shelf, and you go there and it's not there, or maybe it is because I can't see because I've got domestic blindness. Finally, I might ask someone, but as the absolute last resort, will I ask for help because I'm a proud guy, apparently. Maybe that's what they did. They were so proud they wouldn't ask God. Finally, it got so bad, someone said, hey, there's a God that loves us. Let's cry out to him for help. That's what I think probably happened there. I'm sure we never do that. Next slide. Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 10. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he'd gone over to look, God called to him from the bush. And remember, God's voice sounds like thunder. Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. Then he said to him, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was too afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And how does Moses react? Send someone else. Don't send me. In fact, for the next pretty much 2 chapters, he complains and finds excuses about why he shouldn't go. And eventually he does head for Egypt. God sends his brother Aaron to be his spokesperson because Moses doesn't speak so well. He stutters. And he goes off to Egypt. I read something the other day. It said, imagine if Moses was walking along with sheep, looking at a mobile device, checking the footy scores, whatever. He might have missed the burning bush. Because he saw something out of the corner of his eye, and he had to turn to see it, it says in the scriptures. So it's a real reminder that sometimes there are things in our life that distract us from our focus on God. And I 2 weeks ago, I spent 3 days on a silent retreat at Seven Hill up near Clare. And there was I could get phone coverage so that Catherine could call me if she needed to, but I could get no data coverage, so I couldn't go on the internet. And I could have got a Wi-Fi password from the place and gone on the internet, but I thought, I'm going to try to live without the internet for 3 days, which meant I couldn't update my social media. I couldn't see what was happening in the news. I couldn't waste my time on all the other sites that I waste my time on, seeing what the prices of E.H. Holden parts are this week. And it was really good. I was like, after a couple of days, I'm thinking, I don't even know if the world's still going to be there. But I'm sure the people that ran the retreat would have come and told me if something had happened. But it was really good to not be distracted. And there's a person in my house that manages my household, and she often says to me, and she's looking at me now, you spend too much time looking at screens. And you know what? Darling, you might be right. So there's the next lesson. Stay focused. Be aware of what's happening around us, because God could be sending a sign to us, and we won't see it because we're distracted with other things. How am I going for time? All right. So Moses and Aaron, this is down at Exodus chapter 4, verses 29 and 31. Moses and Aaron, so they go to Egypt, and they brought together all the elders of the Israelites. And Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, the snake, the stick that turns into a snake, the hand that turns into leprosy. And they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and seen their misery, they bowed down and worshipped. Isn't that beautiful? God calls to Moses and says, go, I'm going to do this thing. And Moses says no. But they go down to Egypt and they say to the Israelites, God has sent us to free you. And they bow down and they worship God. It's just beautiful. But it doesn't last long. because Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and they say, "Let our people go." And how does Pharaoh react? "Oh, yeah, sure. Off you go." This is the last long passage of Scripture I'm going to read this morning. This is Exodus 5, verses 10 to 21. Exodus 5, verses 10 to 21. It's beautiful when you let the Scripture tell the story. "Then the slave drivers and the overseers went out and said to the people, 'This is what Pharaoh says, I will not give you any more straw. Go out and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your workload will not be reduced at all.' So they would make these bricks with straw, and they found, bricks in excavations with straw. And if you know who David Pawson is, he was a Baptist Bible teacher, and he said there was an excavation where they found a wall, and the lower level was bricks with straw, and the next level was bricks with just stubble and weeds and things, and the next level was just bricks without straw. And he said that showed the level of the persecution that the Egyptians went through, because each level got harder and harder for them. So the people scattered all over Egypt to gather stubble to use for straw. The slave drivers kept pressing them, saying, complete the work required of you each day, just as when you had straw. And Pharaoh's slave drivers beat the Israelites overseers they had appointed, demanding, 'Why haven't you met your quota of bricks yesterday or today as before?' Then the Israelite overseers went and appealed to Pharaoh, 'Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet we are told make bricks. Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people.' And how does Pharaoh react? 'Oh, yeah, we'll make it easier for you.' No. Pharaoh said, 'You are lazy. Lazy is what you are. That's why you keep saying, let's go and sacrifice to the Lord. You've got too much time on their hands,' he reckons. 'Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks.' The Israelite overseers," listen to this, "realized they were in trouble when they were told, 'You are not to reduce the number of bricks required for you each day.'" So David Pawson says, basically, Pharaoh is saying to them at this stage, "I am going to make you guys die out. If I can't have you where I want you, then no one will have you at all." And I'm not exaggerating to say these are the similar conditions that you would have found in a Soviet gulag or even a Nazi concentration camp. They work you hard to give you impossible tasks, and to a point where you're exhausted, you can't get rest, because we know rest is important, and you can't reproduce because you're too tired to do any of that, and you eventually drop dead from exhaustion and you die out. So that's why the Israelites leaders said to themselves, "We're in trouble now. We can see this is serious." When they left Pharaoh, this is Exodus 5 verse 20. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them. And they said, "May the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." They know they're being wiped out. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. Bill's preaching next week. Yeah. Is that right? You preaching next week or am I? We'll flip a coin? No, I didn't say on that. I'm sure you'll lift the mood a bit. Enjoy it while it lasts. This is a positive thing because, as a church, we are discerning what God's will is for us. And in the same way that God led the people out of a situation to a better situation, we are not in anything like the conditions they're in, but we're in a time in the church's life when we're exploring what the future looks like. And we're wanting God to bring us to a place of a land of milk and honey, a land where we can prosper and be a blessing to the nations, which is what God's purpose for the Israelites was, that they would not just be blessed in themselves, but they'd be a blessing to the people around them. So as we go through this over the next few weeks after Bill's intermission, Try and see the connection between what's happening with these guys and what was happening to us. So the last slide for today is just a quick overview. Oh, not that. Oh, this is a great artist. I think he's a Chinese fellow. I'm not sure how to say that. Is it Hikyu? Oh, you're laughing. I tried. What's his name? Sorry? That sounds nothing like what I said, does it? No, I see why you're laughing. I just love the colour. He's a Christian Chinese man, and he paints biblical images with a Chinese traditional colours and style. I think it's just beautiful. This is Moses and Aaron debating with Pharaoh. Beautiful stuff. Anyway, last slide. God hears our cries and sees what we are going through. God cares for us. For God to hear means to care. To see means to do something. God doesn't just say, oh, that's tough for you, eh? He does something about it. God sets events according to his will. When things seem like they're getting tough, well, our response is to listen to God and take what he says seriously. To trust God beyond what we think is possible. Sometimes we think this is an impossible task. But if it's from God, anything is possible with God. And our response, lastly, is to continue to trust when God's promises don't seem to be going so well, just like it was for those Israelites. Things got worse before they got better. Our response is to continue to trust until God's plan is fulfilled. So let's take that with us into the week. Dear God, thank you for your word. Thank you that the events that happened thousands of years ago still speak to us today because you are the eternal God. And I pray that your Spirit will teach us what we need to know to serve you today. In Jesus' name, amen.